There are things we see and think, that's got to be a joke. And that's exactly what people said when they saw the doorman of the building's most expensive penthouse reading Shakespeare at the front desk. Yes, Shakespeare. There he was, uniform wrinkled, a blue Bic pen in his pocket, reading King Lear like it was the back of a medicine bottle. But that wasn't the worst part. It was the mocking laughter of the penthouse owner, a millionaire who couldn't accept the idea that the world might spin without him at the center. "You're going to tell me you actually understand that nonsense, Silas?" he scoffed, a glass of $3,000 whiskey in hand, and the doorman simply looked up, calmly closed the book, and replied in a soft voice, "Anyone who understands suffering understands Shakespeare, sir." Silence thundered through the lobby. But the laughter returned minutes later, echoing loud across the marble. His name, Enrique Mura, heir to the Mura tech empire, owner of companies in 5 countries, young, arrogant, handsome, used to being worshipped even by his own mirror. What he didn't know was the size of the story that Doorman carried on his shoulders. Nor could he imagine that it would be that very story that would turn his life upside down. Because that night, the doorman did something no one expected. He put the book away, looked toward the private elevator, the one he never used, and stepped in. Enrique arrived home with a worn face. The penthouse, as cold as it was silent, seemed to echo the family's lies like a cathedral of pretense. He spread the documents across the glass table, the diary, the paternity certificate, the old letters, the photo of his grandfather with Silas on the bench, everything there, everything proving what no one had dared to say. He called his father by video. "This time," he answered. "Enrique, I'm in the middle of something. Can we talk later?" Enrique turned the camera and showed the paternity certificate. Silence. On the other side of the screen, his father's face turned pale. "Where did you find that?" he whispered. "In warehouse 7, abandoned, like you all abandoned Silas." His father tried to laugh nervously. "That's nonsense. A fake document. That guy made it all up. He was just an employee." "He is my uncle!" Enrique's voice exploded. The windows shook. His heart beat with his grandfather's rage. "You hid this for a lifetime. Why?" His father rubbed his eyes, then his face, breathing deeply, like he was wrestling with something old and heavy. "Because his mother was a maid. And back then, that wasn't acceptable. Your grandfather thought it best to protect the family's reputation. It was the price of the empire. A bastard didn't fit in the Christmas portrait." Enrique froze. "You erased a man's history to preserve a pretty lie in a picture frame." His father sighed. "Enrique, if you start digging into the past, you'll destroy everything we built." Enrique lowered the phone, looked at the diary, and said, almost in a whisper, "Then it's time to rebuild with what's left of the truth." He hung up. That same night, he wrote a letter, addressed to the Moratech board. In it, he wrote clearly, "Silas de Almeida Mora is a legitimate part of the family and deserves public, legal, and moral recognition. What came after was a storm, because touching inheritance and the name of a rich family is poking a lion with a short stick." The next day, he received a court summons from his own aunt. And that's when the story caught fire. Enrique woke to loud knocks at the door. It was the family lawyer, black suit, cold stare, and a folder in hand. "I have a notice, Mr. Enrique. Mrs. Carmen Mura is filing a lawsuit against you for defamation and attempted character assassination of the family name." Enrique opened the folder. Read every line with held breath. Yes, they were really trying to silence him. His aunt, his father's sister, claimed that Enrique was mentally unstable and suffering from hereditary grief delusion. "Hereditary grief?" he scoffed. "So erased blood is now a mental disorder?" The lawyer didn't answer, just lowered his eyes. Enrique was alone. His father in Dubai, his mother locked in a silence retreat, and the uncles scheming to protect the empire. Who did he have? The man he humiliated. Silas. And worse, he didn't know where to find him. He went to the front desk the next day. The new doorman said Silas had handed in his uniform and left without a word. "He just left this for you," the man said, handing him an envelope. Henrique opened it. A handwritten note. "You found what I hid. Now you need to find what I protected." The truth doesn't end on paper. It breathes. At the bottom, an address, Rua São Geraldo, number 208. Henrique went without thinking twice. When he got there, he found a simple brick house, a messy garden, clothes on the line. He rang the bell. A girl around 9 opened the door, hair tied, wearing a Harry Potter shirt, eyes wary. "Hi? Are you the rich guy?" Henrique was confused. "Sorry, who told you that?" A voice came from inside. "I did, Marina." Silas. Wearing an old shirt, flip-flops, a dish towel over his shoulder, and a stained apron. Henrique froze. "She your daughter?" he asked, voice choked. Silas just smiled. "She's the reason I never said anything. The world that erased me won't erase her too." Henrique felt a lump in his throat, because he understood. The story was bigger than him. It was about memory, about justice, about naming those who had everything stolen, except their dignity. But the family wouldn't take it lightly. The following week, Henrique was removed from Muratec's presidency. His letter had become a scandal, and the elite doesn't forgive blood betrayal, even if the blood is the same. Now it was war. Henrique left the Muratec building with his head held high. While shareholders whispered behind his back, he smiled inside, because sometimes losing the throne is the only way to sit on the right side of the table. In the news it was headline, "Muratec heir exposes decades-old secret and is removed from company." And in smaller letters, "Doorman may be hidden family relative." Henrique watched it all with mixed anger and relief. The world knew, even if they mocked, even if they doubted, Silas's name now existed and couldn't be erased again. Silas, meanwhile, was the same. Simple house, fresh coffee, notebook on the table, Marina studying with a pencil worn to the nub. "You stirred up a hornet's nest, Henrique," Silas said one afternoon, "and you stayed silent your whole life, not out of fear, out of protection." Silence. Henrique admired this man more each day. So calm, so firm, so grounded, so different from everything he'd learned inside the golden walls of the elite. One day, Marina asked, "Uncle Henrique, why aren't you on TV anymore?" "Because some people don't like the truth, Marina. They like mirrors, and I broke theirs," she smiled. "Mom used to say Grandpa had 2 sons, one in front of the cameras and one behind the scenes." Henrique looked at Silas. Silas looked away. That was it. Grandpa knew. He always knew. And still, he chose to hide Silas behind a uniform. For image. For the times. For cowardice, really. But Henrique had made his decision. The next month, he sold one of his apartments in Paris. With the money, he renovated Warehouse 7. There, he founded the Silas Mora Institute. Education wears no uniform. Books, classes, lectures, psychological support, tutoring, real literature for those always kept outside the library. A plaque on the entrance read, "They laughed at me for reading. Today they read because I resisted." The institute made the news. It became a symbol, and in one of the first classes, Marina read aloud the same Shakespeare line Silas read at the front desk. "We cry when we are born because we arrive into this vast asylum." Henrique, in the back, let a tear fall, but it hurt, because the family was still plotting, still accusing, still mocking, and now they planned something even worse, because when the elite loses in fair play, they go for the dirty trick. 3 weeks after the inauguration of the Silas Mora Institute, Henrique received an urgent notice. The family was suing him for unauthorized use of the Mora name in a private institution. It was absurd. They wanted to erase Silas once again, now through the courts. Worse, they filed a temporary injunction to suspend all activities at the institute, claiming it damaged the family legacy of the Mora name. Henrique seethed with rage. The legacy they built on the silence of a brother? What legacy is that? His lawyer, an old college friend, tried to calm him down. Enrique, this case is symbolic, but they have influence. Judges have lunch with them. Priests give them private mass. Even society pages will turn on you. Then we'll go with what they don't have, truth. That same day, Enrique recorded a video. Sitting on the warehouse stairs with Silas's diary in his hands, he looked straight into the camera and said, "My name is Enrique Moura, and I carry this name not because of wealth, but because I now know the price of what it hides. If they want to take my family name, let them. But don't you dare erase the name of the one who built the noblest part of this story, Silas, my uncle, my example, my blood." The video went viral, millions of views in 3 days. Newspapers, influencers, teachers, artists, everyone was talking. Like justice for Silas became a trending hashtag, but with the pressure came the counterattack. Aunt Carmem released a fake dossier on Silas. They claimed he had a criminal record, lied about his past, and was a resentful employee trying to gain fame. Silas read the news at home, didn't say a word, just lowered his head. Marina, his daughter, curled up in his lap and whispered, "Daddy, are they going to take us away?" Silas shut his eyes tight, holding back the pain. Enrique arrived minutes later. "They can take everything, except our place in history." But Silas was tired. Tired of being a ghost, of always having to prove he existed. Enrique saw the risk of defeat in his eyes, and that's where stories begin to change, when the one who's carried the world on his back thinks of letting it drop. That night, Silas disappeared, left home, and left a note. "Forgive me, Enrique, but some fights, we tire before we win." Desperation took over, because sometimes justice comes too late. Enrique searched the entire city, police stations, hospitals, bus terminals, nothing. Silas had vanished like dust in a strong wind. Marina didn't speak. She just clutched her father's pillow, his scent still on the fabric, the sound of his absence screaming in silence. Enrique, crushed, did what he never thought he would do. He went to his grandfather's grave. Yes, the very man who gave the family name its fortune, but denied it to his own son. Standing before the black marble tomb, with no cameras, no audience, no pride. Enrique spoke. "You taught me Moura meant power, but now I understand. Moura also means silence, cowardice, and shame. The son you hid was the most honorable man I've ever known. And if he dies because of you, you don't deserve even the ground they buried you in," he cried, not like a spoiled child, but like a man mourning what he could have had. On his way back, he passed in front of the institute. There were candles lit, flowers, posters with messages like, "Where's Silas? You can't erase someone who taught you to read. Silent hero." People from the community, former students, neighbors, all gathered. The doorman had become a symbol. Enrique stood on the step and spoke, voice trembling. "Silas didn't disappear. He went to gather strength, and when he returns, he'll find this place stronger than ever." But the truth was, he wasn't so sure. Until, days later, an envelope arrived. No sender. Inside, just a photo. Silas, sitting on a bench, staring at the ocean in parity. And on the back, in the same handwriting from the diary, "Every rejected child needs to dive into silence to resurface whole." Enrique went after him, found the beach, walked across the rocks. There he was, sitting, staring at the horizon, a soul under construction. "Took you long enough, Enrique," Silas said without turning. "I had to learn how to look the right way." Silas took a deep breath. "Now do you understand why I never told you?" Enrique replied, voice steady. "Because you didn't want revolt. You wanted respect. And now, uncle, the whole world is listening." Silas lowered his head. A tear rolled down. "I just wish my father had done that. It's too late for him, but not for you, not for Marina." At that moment, the ocean washed away the past, but the family still had one last blow to strike, and this time the target was Marina. The news came like a knife in a sealed envelope. Enrique was at the institute when he received the urgent court order. The document, signed by a powerful judge, stated that Marina, Silas's daughter, was subject to a request for temporary custody on grounds of unstable environment and undue exposure in family media conflict. In other words, they wanted to take the girl from him. Enrique read it over and over. The paper shook in his hands. The elite was using a child as ammunition, trying to destroy Silas through what he loved most, his daughter. He rushed to Parati. When Marina saw Enrique, she ran into his arms, but her face no longer held its spark. "They said they'll take me to a house with no books," she whispered. Silas held the crumpled court order. His eyes didn't hold anger, but grief. The grief of someone who always loses before the fight even begins. "They're not taking her from me, Enrique. Even if I have to vanish again." "You're not vanishing. You're rising. You're fighting. Because now you're not alone." That night, they returned to the capital. The next day, Enrique entered the judge's office, the same one who signed the order. He had a folder in hand. Inside, videos of Marina reading, school letters, teacher testimonies, proof of the bond between father and daughter. But Enrique went further. He turned on a recorder and said, "Your Honor, if Marina is removed from her father, Muratek will answer for persecution, prejudice, and judicial manipulation, and I will expose everything, name by name, including yours." The judge froze. Long seconds of silence. Then, in a murmur, "We will reconsider the order, file a motion for review. The case will be dismissed due to lack of urgency." Enrique left the room with blood boiling. Silas waited outside. "Did it work?" he asked. "For now, but this isn't over, Uncle." Silas smiled, relieved. At that moment, Marina showed up with a paper in hand. "Uncle Enrique, can I show you something?" It was a drawing. She had drawn herself, Silas and Enrique, hugging in front of the institute. At the top of the page, in childlike handwriting, "Family is who fights together." Enrique couldn't hold back tears. Silas couldn't either. In that moment, they knew they had lost the elite surname, but they had gained something no will in the world could give, rooted dignity. But the Mura family still had one last card to play, and this time it came from the top, where no one expected. Enrique was at the reception of the institute when the phone rang. It was his lawyer. "Enrique, I have something to tell you that will turn everything upside down." He got straight to the point. "Your grandfather left a secret will, and in it, Silas is named as an heir." Enrique nearly dropped the phone. "What? That will was read years ago." "Yes, but this one was written earlier, and it was in the possession of a former family accountant who passed away 2 weeks ago. The document surfaced during an internal audit." The lawyer's voice turned grave. "If it's validated, Silas has a right to a share of the inheritance, a significant one." Enrique didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Silas, a rightful heir, the man who for years was reduced to a uniform and badge, could now sit at the table as a Mora, by name and by law. But of course, hell exploded on the other side of the family. Aunt Carmen filed for annulment, claimed the grandfather had been emotionally manipulated by Silas in his youth. The same elite who claimed to be moral was now calling the paternity of a humble black man an emotional mistake. Enrique didn't stay silent. He went to the press, to the courts, to social media. Silas doesn't want the money. He wants the truth to be recognized. The wound is too deep to be paid with money. But if they think justice only listens to those with inheritance, then we're knocking on the right door. In the background, Marina saw everything. She didn't say a word, but she drew. One day, she handed Enrique a new picture, an open book, and inside it, a handwritten family: Silas, Marina, Enrique. "Our story doesn't fit in a vault," she said. The following week, the preliminary hearing took place. For the first time, Silas entered a courtroom without carrying a mop, wearing a borrowed suit, but with the posture of a man who had always walked with dignity. The judge read the will, all eyes locked on her. At the end, she said, "If the parties wish to contest, another date will be set. But the evidence of authenticity is clear." Aunt Carmen rose, eyes blazing. "This is a fraud. He wants to destroy our family name. Henrique responded firmly. He wants to rebuild his, the one you all tried to bury. Silence. The hearing was suspended for document analysis. But that very day, something unexpected happened. Silas received a letter. No return address. No fancy envelope, just a piece of paper written in pen. You've won, but be careful. The name you want to honor may hide more than you can bear to know. On the back, an old photo. 3 men, one was the grandfather, another, Silas, and the third, an unfamiliar face, identical to Henrique, younger, same eyes, and there, a new mystery began. It seemed the grandfather had more than one hidden son. Henrique stared at the photo like someone facing a shattered mirror. The pieces showed a man he had never seen, but who carried the same restlessness now burning inside him. "Who's this, Silas?" he asked, handing over the picture. Silas studied it. His expression shifted. "This man, his name was Jonas. He was our father's best friend. They grew up together in the countryside, but then he vanished." Henrique frowned. "Vanished? How?" "One day, he just didn't show up anymore. Some said he moved to São Paulo and became a drifter. Others said he died in a bar fight. But they never found a body, no trace." Silence. Then Henrique pointed at the resemblance. "He looks just like me. How is that possible?" Silas took a deep breath. "Maybe he wasn't just our father's friend." Henrique understood. "You're saying he could be my grandfather too?" Silas nodded. "Or our dad's brother, or even his son. In this family, the family tree was chopped down with an axe." The mystery deepened. Henrique hired a genealogist, tracked old records, and found Jonas's name on a list of patients at a now-closed psychiatric hospital from the 90s. He went to the site, an abandoned building, broken windows, the stench of old urine and neglect. Inside, among mouldy files, Henrique found the chart. Jonas Ferreira dos Santos, institutionalized in 1987, released in 1992. No records after. Notes, speaks little. Delusions about lost children, repeats the name Little Henrique. Henrique's blood ran cold. He returned home, sat down with Silas, showed him the paper. "What if I'm not my father's son?" Silas looked at him calmly. "Henrique, even if that's true, what you've built, no one can take away. Not inheritance, not a surname." But Henrique couldn't sleep. He took a DNA test, using his own sample, his father's, and, with court approval, exhumed remains of his grandfather. Days later, the result arrived. Incompatible. Henrique was not the biological grandson of the Moura patriarch, and therefore not a rightful heir to the fortune. His world collapsed. The man who once mocked a doorman for reading Shakespeare was now the bastard in the lineage. Henrique laughed, a loud, guttural laugh. "Silas, seems life has a sense of humor only God understands." But Silas replied with wisdom, "Now you understand what I've lived through, and still you're more Moura than any of them, because you fought, and those who fight for truth are born noble." Henrique picked up Silas's diary. On the inside cover he wrote, "True history is never told by the victors, but by the survivors." That night, Henrique slept without worrying about his last name, because he finally understood. He didn't need the inheritance. He was the inheritance. But before the end, there was still one last letter to read, and it came from his grandfather himself. The letter arrived on a cloudy morning, as if the sky knew it wouldn't be light. An aged envelope, sealed with red wax. On the back, 2 handwritten words, "For Henrique." Silas recognized the handwriting from afar. "It's from our father." Henrique swallowed hard, opened it carefully. The paper trembled between his fingers. The letter began with a sentence that seemed written in dried tears. "Forgive me, my son, and yes, I know I'm not your blood father, but maybe I was the best I could be, and that was never enough." Henrique sat down, read slowly. "I found out your mother was pregnant by Jonas on a night she cried, and I didn't understand why. She begged me to accept you as mine, and I did, not out of nobility, but fear. Fear of scandal, of the elite, of my name next to the word bastard. You grew up carrying the weight of my pride. It shaped you, but also wounded you. Enrique paused, breathed deeply, continued. Silas, that name I buried in pain. He was my blood, born of a forbidden love with a woman my family would never accept. I tried to hide him, tried to pay to silence him, tried to erase him, but he grew strong, he grew dignified. He became more of a man than I ever was. Silas's hands trembled. He recognized it. Enrique nodded, eyes full. The legacy I built has buildings, stocks, and profits, but no peace. Whoever wants my wealth, let them have it. But if you want my forgiveness, carry my truth. At the end of the letter, a lone line, as if written while crying, "Forgive the father you never had, and let me rest as a man who failed while trying to do right." Silas cried. Enrique too. But it wasn't pain, it was liberation. That letter was the last brick in the prison where they had all lived for years, and also the key to the exit. Enrique gathered the letter, the diary, the certificate, the photo of Jonas, and went to the institute. He assembled the students, the teachers, the community, and there, in an improvised auditorium, he read the letter out loud. At the end, he said, "If there's one thing this story taught me, it's that family isn't built with blood, but with courage. And dignity is a legacy that isn't stored in a safe, but in action." Silas stepped onto the stage. Marina ran into their arms. Applause lasted minutes, and the silence afterward lasted longer, because it was the silence of peace. But there was one last decision to make. Enrique had to choose what to do with the fortune he was now legally excluded from, and the answer would change everything. The next morning, Enrique locked himself in what used to be his office, now part of the institute. For hours he stared at the wall, as if trying to see beyond the paint, beyond the concrete, beyond himself. He was no longer the heir Enrique, nor the executive Enrique, not even the magazine cover Enrique from 2 years ago. Now, he was just a man with a choice and a world on his shoulders. He had lost the legal right to the inheritance, but there were still companies, shares, properties in his name that didn't depend on blood. He could sue, fight, kick down the empire's door and demand what was his. Instead, he chose the opposite. "Uncle," Enrique said that afternoon, "you'll be the only Mora who inherited nothing, but the first to receive everything." Silas didn't understand. "What do you mean?" Enrique smiled, placed a folder on the table, legal documents, asset transfers, a foundation established. "I'm donating everything, the shares, the properties, the part I own, and even the part they took from me. All of it will be converted into education, healthcare, culture, a fund to keep this institute alive for generations. The name will remain Silas Mora, but now the inheritance is public and immortal." Silas tried to speak, but his throat failed. "You're giving everything up, Enrique." "No, Uncle, I'm gaining. For the first time, I'm building a legacy that doesn't rely on a last name or handshakes from the rich." That week, Enrique called a press conference. Everyone expected an attack speech, another scandal. Instead, they heard silence for a few seconds and then a simple message. "I am not the heir of the Mura Empire. I never was. But I am the heir of something greater, the dignity of the man this family tried to erase. And in his name, Silas, I return to the people everything that was built on silence. From today on, the largest private social project in this city begins, and it won't depend on a name. It will depend on courage." Timid applause. Then a standing ovation. Silas watched from home, tears in his eyes. Marina clapped both hands and shouted, "That's my uncle." The elite, of course, tried to sabotage. They froze accounts, made up debts, filed appeals, but it was too late. The people had embraced the cause, and what the people embrace never bows to a crown again. The following month, Enrique opened a new space, Casa Jonas, a refuge for forgotten children, a shelter for youth without family, in honor of the possible grandfather who was left behind. At the entrance, a sign read, "If the elite won't recognize you, come, we'll call you family." But one last thing remained, something Silas had carried in his heart for years, and that Enrique was about to discover. End alone, and what happened up there, no one dared to tell until today. But I will, because the truth, my child, always finds its way to the top. If you're one who loves a good story, hit that like and subscribe, or you'll miss the rest of this tale. The penthouse doorbell rang 3 times, 3 sharp knocks, decisive, without hesitation. Inside, Enrique was laughing with 2 suit-and-tie friends, drinking, talking nonsense, betting absurd amounts of money, enough to buy a compact car. One of them widened his eyes when he heard the bell. "You expecting someone, Enrique?" "Nope, probably for the neighbor." Or "wrong floor," he laughed. But when he opened the door, his smile froze. There, standing at the door, was Silas, the doorman. No uniform, no badge, eyes straight ahead. Enrique nearly spit out his drink. "Are you crazy? What the hell are you doing up here? This is trespassing." Silas took a step forward, his voice calm. "I came to deliver a story, one that might save yours." The friends laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke. But Silas pulled an old notebook from his pocket, hard cover, worn edges, looked like an old diary. "You mock my books, Enrique, but there's one here you should read, and fast." Enrique, ego inflated and whiskey rising, lost his patience. "Get lost, Silas. Get the hell out of my house." Silas didn't move. He slowly lifted the diary. "Before you throw me out, just open to the marked page. That's all I ask." And then he turned his back, walked away, calm, like someone who knows he's left a ticking time bomb behind. Enrique stood there, diary in hand, his friends silent. Curiosity is a traitor, even thinking it ridiculous. He opened it. The first line on the marked page read, "To Enrique Mura, the truth you never wanted to read." And just below, in firm handwriting, "If you're reading this, it means it's time to learn that your last name didn't start with you." The silence in the room grew heavy. Enrique slammed the diary shut, but it was too late, because some things, once seen, can never be unseen. And that night, he couldn't sleep. The next day, Silas didn't show up for work, and Enrique started investigating what that damned diary meant. Enrique spent the whole day with the diary in hand, agitated, restless, like a mosquito had flown into his soul and wouldn't stop buzzing. He tried to work, couldn't, tried to drink, the whiskey wouldn't go down. Those words echoed like a hammer. "Your last name didn't start with you." "What the hell did that madman mean?" he muttered, pacing around the penthouse. He video-called his father, but the old man was in Dubai, golfing with a prince. Didn't want to talk. "We'll deal with that later, Enrique. Don't give crazy people any attention." But the problem was, it didn't sound like madness. At the back of the diary there was a photo glued in. Black and white, blurry, but you could see 2 men sitting on a park bench. One of them looked exactly like Silas, and the other was Enrique's grandfather. His hands started to sweat. Flipping through the notebook, Enrique found old newspaper clippings, yellowed letters, and even a note in his grandfather's handwriting. "If Enrique ever finds this out, forgive me. I did what I thought was right to protect the family." "Protect? From what?" he shouted, throwing the diary across the room. No answer came. At the front desk, Silas's replacement only said he had taken indefinite leave. Enrique felt something he'd never felt before. Shame, not from the situation, but from realizing that maybe that Doorman knew more about his own family than he did. He returned to the diary. One passage was underlined. The truth was buried in 1983 behind Warehouse 7, but the earth still groans. Warehouse 7. Enrique searched the company system. There it was, a forgotten property in Moratex records, an old abandoned warehouse in the suburbs. He grabbed his car keys immediately. Because when an itch gets behind your ear, my boy, you either scratch it or go insane. What he found there was more than disturbed dirt. Enrique drove like he was escaping himself. The path to the warehouse was a maze of potholes, burnt oil stench, and thick dust that clung even to pride. He stopped in front of a corroded iron structure, signs hanging by wire, a rusty padlock. He pushed the door, and it opened. Inside, time hadn't just stopped, it had rotted. Broken tiles, scattered documents, the stench of mold and rust. And at the back, hidden behind fallen shelves, was a small safe half buried under rubble. Enrique forced the lid. It was rusted but gave way. Inside, no money, no jewels, just papers. Lots of them. Birth certificates, old photos, torn contracts, and a brown envelope, handwritten, Silas de Almeida. But what made him go pale was another document, with his grandfather's name stamped in bold. Paternity recognition, Silas de Almeida Moura. Enrique's world collapsed then and there. "What the—" he mumbled, hands trembling. He flipped through it again. It was official, signed and sealed. Silas was his grandfather's son, which meant Silas was Enrique's uncle, a doorman, unknown, erased by the family. His ears rang, his head spun. Enrique fell to his knees inside that warehouse. The man he mocked was his own blood, and at that moment he understood why Silas read Shakespeare, because only those betrayed by their own story understand the weight of tragedy. The diary was a cry for justice, a last resource of someone erased from the family tree out of shame, racism, or greed, and now wanted to be remembered. Enrique took everything, loaded the car, and for the first time in his life didn't know who he was. Or rather, he knew, and didn't like it. But the worst was still coming, because he decided to confront his own family. And there are truths that once said can never be unsaid.